terms of telling more stories, what does a gigantic increase in your patient deductions tell you? This is where the written case comes into play. You're going to want to read the written case to find out what changed in 2021 that might have caused this. There's a few different things that would change your total deductions. One might be is if you increased overnight, you increased your charges for everything. You still have the same contracts with Medicare and with insurance companies, so they're still going to pay you the same thing, but you charge more. So this would be your gross patient revenue, but that's not what happened here. That was a little change, but not a big change. This was a big change. It looks so this might hint towards the second possible reason for a gigantic increase in deductions, which might be that you signed a new managed care contract, so you had to write off more, or maybe there was a big increase in bad debt, for example, if there was a recession. But again, that information, look in the case for some clues, because you'll want to think of it this way. If this is your department and you're trying to figure out how come, if you're a revenue center and your boss says to you, how come total deductions went up like that? You want to have a reason. You don't just want to say, well, they went up 60% or 80%. You want to say they went up 80% and that's because of maybe a new managed care contract or maybe something else. But you're putting it in terms that they'll understand what event was behind that change. Now, at this point, you already also have enough for an interesting graph. Now, remember with Excel, it's always best to have a little graph table that's separate because Excel is just fussy. So we'll call this our graph table. There we go. And we are going to have two things in the graph. You can change what you have in your graphs. Well, you're not doing these ratios anyway. But I'm going to use my total deductions and my total gross patient revenue. And I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to grab these numbers for right there. And I need a heading on that. So my heading will be the year right there. And then I'm going to copy these across. Now, Excel is extremely fussy about exactly where everything is. It wants no blank lines. Blank lines are good when you're displaying the graph, displaying the table. But when you're creating a graph, don't have blank lines or blank columns. Because you can see right there, there's no blank between there and there. Now we do have a little bit of an issue though, because there's a blank column and Excel's not going to like that. So we're going to move these over. Now you could just hand type if you wanted, but we're just going to move them over. And you want this cell up here, that upper left-hand corner, you actually want that blank. If you do it this way, I know it seems odd to do all this work just because Excel's fussy, but if you do it this way, blank up here, and then no spaces all around, all you have to do is highlight the entire area and say insert, and we're going to insert a graph. And I think a line graph would be good, so we'll have a line graph right there. And there, we've inserted a graph. Now I'll make that a little bit smaller so we can see what's happening. Now you can see the orange line is that gross revenue, and the blue line is those deductions. And you can see something definitely happened in 2020, because 2021, there was a big jump in everything. But it's kind of hard to see what's happening with these two different lines, because one line is so much higher than the other. So this is something they call split axes in Excel. And I'll show you how to do it briefly, but there's plenty of videos on YouTube that show you how to do this. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to click on either line arbitrarily, but I'll click on the blue one. And then I'm going to right click on the blue one. And I'm going to say Format Data Series. And see up there where it says primary or secondary axis, I'm just going to say secondary axis. And there we go, and I'll close that. So what it did is it took the total deductions right there, and this is the axis for total deductions. If you look at the numbers down here, total gross revenues were in the 30s and 40s, 30s and 40s over here. Deductions on the other, gross revenue, excuse me, was 30s and 40s. Your deductions were only 4, 3, 3. So you can see the scale over here is different. So the reason it's helpful to have two different scales is so you can see more of what's going on. And in doing that, you can definitely see this sharp uptake. Before we did this, it wasn't as obvious that the deductions had a really, really big increases in 1 year. But once we put deductions on its own axis over here, you can see this gigantic increase really fast. Now I'll show you a little trick. Once you have these lines, you can actually right click here, and I'm going to hit change the font, and I'm just going to change the font color to blue. There. Why did I do that? Because the line is blue. See the line blue, the numbers are blue. It starts to be easier to put to keep things in line, keep things in organized in your head. And I'm going to do the same thing over here with these. Since those go with the, I'm going to click the font button again. Since those go with the orange line, I'll color those numbers orange. So you can see it's easier when you look at the graph and you're seeing, okay, gross patient revenue is orange. Those are the orange numbers. So you can see it growing from about 30 up to about, what's that, 44. And then for deductions, you can see those growing from about 4,000 right there up to about 10,000 over there. So you can see deductions definitely went up faster over time. So at this point, your mini table down here has got two of the three critical components you wanted. The first component was to look at the components of the ratio itself. So this ratio was just this deductions divided by that. So there's our ratio in raw form. That's it, and it shows some kind of movement. But then here's all the things that go into it, there and then there. And then we have this where we looked at those changes over time. So the first part was just to make sense of where we were in the ratio and its components and how those are moving over time. And then we went down here and we drew a graph to show how those components were changing over time. So that's two things. Now the last thing to do is to start looking at possibly related measures. In other words, we're trying to make sense of this. And are there other things that we can learn from other ratios? So we'll just call this related measures, and this is a fishing trip. You're going to look at a few different ones. Sorry, I'm not a good speller. But you might look at a few different things down here and only use a handful. You don't have to show the ones that don't help tell a story. But if it does help tell a story, definitely keep them here. So like I said, you'll be trying a few different things, but since I know this case, some of the things that would be interesting, especially since one of the numbers we're looking at is gross patient revenue, one of the things would be to look at, and notice I'm just putting the plus sign there because we're just going to scroll up to find things that sound like they're going to help us. One of the things that will help us will be right here, which is your price per discharge. And actually the next thing, the price per visit, will also be helpful. So we have those two right there. We'll copy those formulas over here to get the numbers. And we can copy those numbers across to see them trending over time. Now, just like we did up here, that percentage change, we're going to look at a percentage change in these related measures. There and there. So percentage change is always current year minus previous year divided by previous year. There, and then there as well. So what's happening with our price? In other words, how much we're charging per discharge or per visit. And remember, visits are your outpatient visits. So this is kind of like looking at what are my inpatient prices and my outpatient prices and how have those been changing over time. And you can see that there was a slight there was one big year, and it's not even a big year, but you tended to be increasing your prices for inpatient 4 or 5% a year, except for this one big year in 2021 when you went up basically you went up twice as fast. But you can also see that there's been a lot more volatility here in your outpatient visits, in your outpatient pricing. You had a very big increase there as well in the same 2021.